You're keeping me in suspense, man. All right. Hey, everybody.
Well, until they get served. Yeah. Well, I'm just excited to know that to finally realize that my great grandfather has a different letter. So I'm going to type the photo and see if I can search some
Evening, everybody on the live stream. There's a large bar line, so it'll be a couple of minutes, but hey Martin, hey Chris, hey Octavio, hey Jordana, hey Kristen, hey Karen, hey Karen, hey Karen, hey Kathleen and Kathleen, hey Ann, hey Ann. Hey Laura, hey Diane. Hey Mom. I hear we're live, yeah, so I've been trying to say hi to all the regulars. They're probably tuning in.
Actually, I think I must have.
But then all the people that I knew in high school, they would have a different, just how things are spelled.
Oh, it's so
Well, I knew my Italian grandmother.
okay. Time to post comments telling people not to break
I mean, it seems like something the last time is brothers, uncles, so there's a bunch of family up there. So it'd be nice to know more about this. Uncles and aunts to see. But it was interesting to see. One lived to 90, so, which, yeah, my father lived to 76, so.
Pretty good about that.
He was a little still. But, yeah, they're kind of in the 80s, in there. But I
Somebody said, hey Adam.
Right by the microphone.
Okay.
Did you get the special sparkling wine?
Hey everybody, we're waiting on the bar line to die down a little bit before we get started properly. Talk amongst yourselves. Read your poetry out loud, play some jazz.
For $10, it's pretty good.
There's about 175 people on the Chicagoans stream. I've looked at the mysterious one.
Whatever that is. I met a guy, yeah, it's Russian for cheap, the equivalent of cheap. I hung out with this Russian guy who drank too much. Budapest. And as the night went by, you could tell his throat again. I can't hear what it's meant, but it...
I'm here.
You hung out with him for like a week or something, or like several
Budapest is cool.
I've always wanted to go there, and I've never been to it. I seriously recovery that concerts inside the church.
There was a little one, my mom and I were there, and every night they medieval instruments. And played the pipe organ. Smaller church, but it was so cool. For like a little over an hour, 600-year-old organ.
That's the beauty of the city itself. It's like, it's like Paris, in terms of its architectural beauty and ornamentation. Classics. Stone buildings.
It was like opening up a present to
Hey everybody, we just went to the bar line and sat down a little bit before we get started properly.
This way, yeah.
There was a Chris Kringle market, then there was an arcade going into the building, and there was a really small coffee shop. I realized coffee being...
Watch the comments and links. You can look at the pictures all through the evening. Are they numbered on there? Okay. Okay. I've just got to list this a number here so I can at least say what they all are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the slide show, there's no interpretation, so if you use the numbers from your slides, it'll be the same.
Alright.
A lot of weed over there.
Now, of course, seats becoming fashionable in the U.S. and all the states have
So
legalized.
one of my next questions is to try and find
Are there coffee shops too, or is it just at one and then the other? They don't want to
Somebody sitting here.
I don't know why they
probably
adopted that.
Physical, yeah, physical, yeah.
You can sit in these seats, front row.
Janice, thank you again.
Hello.
I watch you on Facebook.
Oh, thank you.
I tell everybody I meet about you,
Oh, thank you.
especially if they're new in Chicago.
Oh, awesome.
Like, God.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Rice in and it was wonderful.
Wonderful. Kind of out of it.
And yes, it was all menu, but once you cooked it in a broth, that's fine. I just set the meat on the sleep.
It wasn't a good meal,
Get that anytime.
you know,
That was never a problem.
Well, duck
oh,
is
you
that
got, oh,
way.
good. But at least you got some use out of it.
Guys who didn't like
I came home and I was hungry.
And it's closed.
Yeah, Chuck is good, but yeah.
It's
Hey, how you
Members are sitting there.
All right.
Chuck is good.
another pair.
I gave up. I was so tired.
everything's okay.
It's, you know, there was a I've made
The highway's on fire, but I was
Oh, that's so boring. No, go in.
I didn't say thank you.
But, oh, okay. I love, yeah, I love jobs, like, yeah, you don't, I mean, I've made jobs too for holidays. So much more like it.
Because before you had to like adjust it, it's like damage your lungs.
Doing it in small families.
Part of the presentation.
Yeah, those are really, those are really.
there's a battery,
Yeah,
all we
yeah,
do is
everybody
inhale.
have big.
And nights, and it's not oil, it's not cigarette or caffeine in the lungs. It's like THC now. It doesn't take much. To get you there.
Yeah.
Oh, look,
Well, it's in Japan too. And they drink in this tea, so.
yeah, so it's just like.
Vibrate. 5-minute warning. Phones on vibrate. It's polite.
I'm gonna give you a Jewish one.
Vibrate. It's cool.
To life, l'chaim.
Everyone knows that.
That's a beautiful one. I like that.
Put your phone on vibrate because it's polite.
Well, that's important.
That almost rhymes. We got to work on that a little. We'll workshop it later.
Well, let me get my picture
A
first.
vibrator a day keeps a doctor.
There's a lot of easy jokes here. Yeah.
That's your personal thing.
Oh, I knew someone who said that.
Yeah, if you wait until I'm actually talking, I'll take some past off for that.
Yeah.
Probably get a better shot out of it.
It's true.
Hey, everybody watching on the live stream. We'll be getting started pretty soon here, but there's a long line for the bars, so we thought we'd hold off a little bit. Follow the link that has been going around so you can see the pictures. This isn't quite like my normal Thursday night presentations.
Linda, somebody called you. Somebody's calling.
Did he find something good to get you? Okay. Yeah. Good.
Did you get your hair
Yeah.
I'm gonna start lathering on.
Lather on.
Looks good.
I'll sit here at the piano.
Okay, that sounds
It doesn't actually turn on, so.
It's currently broken.
Yeah.
It's a sore subject. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our online viewers. Welcome to our people that are here in person. I want to just go ahead and turn up the mic volume.
They went that night. And I assumed.
Oh, that's better. All right, guys. If you're watching in person, please go ahead and put your phone on vibrate because it's polite. We do appreciate that. If you're watching at home on the live stream, please feel free to do whatever you want with your phone. But you should probably still put it on vibrate because you don't want to interrupt Adam's awesome talk. I'm going to be sitting here for a little bit of time, stalling, as we wait for our final guest in person to retrieve their cocktails from the bar and get settled. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for being here. If you're here in person, thank you for being vaccinated. If you're not here in person and you're vaccinated, thank you for being vaccinated. We are a nonprofit organization and we study history, so we know vaccines work. It's the reason none of us have polio. Shout out to vaccines because they are the reason you are not in an iron lung right now. Also, they're important. You can come attend any of our events in person if you're vaccinated. Yay! All right, so who are we? Who am I? My name is Patty. I know we have a lot of first-timers here. Patty Swanson, I should probably be specific. I started Chicago for Chicagoans 6 years ago in June of this year. It is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are an all-volunteer organization. I am not paid, and neither is my board of directors. We do pay our speakers, but we exist. We're for Chicagoans. We are by Chicagoans. Our whole mission statement is to provide access to great, authentic, diverse Chicago histories without you having to break the bank. So all of our events are offered on a pay-what-you-can basis, whether you're here in person or you're watching online. If you have a great time tonight, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to our organization. You can do so at chicagoforchicagoans.org/donate. There's also links if you're looking at the internet, or if you're in person, there's 1,000 QR codes posted all around the room. Careful, some of them are drink menus. So there's a million ways to spend money with QR codes in this bar tonight. You can buy drinks with a QR code. You can donate money to us for a QR code, or you can look at Adam's slides by scanning this QR code. Ooh, there's also printed packets. Or if you're watching from the internet, there is a link in the comments and in the description to the slides. High resolution. Y'all can zoom in. I think zooming in is important. I really like to be able to see the details. And Adam has included some really awesome images tonight that are like full, pages from newspapers, old newspapers. So I think you'll want to be able to zoom in. That's why there aren't slides like floating next to my face. Okay, let's see, what else? 501c3 nonprofit, we got that. We're all volunteers, we got that. If you cannot afford to donate tonight, that is fine. We are here to provide you with history anyway. The only thing that we ask is that you say nice things about us on the internet. That means a lot. And tell all your friends. So this is presented today. I'm still stalling for time, but I'm almost done. This is presented today as part of our winter lecture series. We do this every year. We are streaming live tonight, or you're here in person, from room 13 at the Old Chicago Inn. It is a members-only speakeasy located under a period-style bed and breakfast. It is a family-run business. It is a small business. It is a local business. All words I love. And you can become a member here and come anytime you want if you're a member. Or you can come here every Thursday for the rest of our lectures when the room is open to the public, although we do ask that you RSVP to our events. We have a lot of great events coming up. There are also flyers scattered around the room, or you can look on our website for our upcoming events. Next week, for instance, a horrible history of Chicago bridge safety. Lots of great topics ahead. We talk about serious topics, we talk about silly topics, we talk about all kinds of things. But the theme of the lecture series this year is Chicago Obscura. So basically I don't know if you guys remember, there was a really bad pandemic for like 2 years and we couldn't do any walking tours. So all of the historians and the tour guides that our organization partners with to develop programming, people like Adam, they have been stuck inside for 2 years researching their favorite things. And if you're a Chicago historian, you are researching some really bizarre minutia of the city of Chicago. So I invited all of our participants, all of our guest speakers this year to present on pretty much anything they've been researching and they really were excited about, which is a really great way for me to segue into my introduction of the one and only Adam Selzer. He is a tour guide and a historian. He runs Mysterious Chicago. He works with me and a couple other really awesome folks on a little project we call Effing Chicago. Adam's done lots of events for me in the past. I help him with things too. We collab. Yeah. But as the Chicago Tribune has called him before, an amateur historian. Just kidding. He's written lots of books. He's an expert in all things Weird Chicago. Many serial killers, maybe you've heard of H.H. Holmes. Just possibly, I would say, as a historian and somebody who spends a lot of time in archives, Adam hustles more than any other tour guide I have ever met. He produces a tour every single day for his Facebook audience. He is truly an incredibly impressive output of history, and he spends a lot of time looking at microfilm. So I suggested, and he obliged, doing some original research tonight. So Adam's going to be talking all about a institution, a speakeasy of sorts, in the 1920s known as the Wind Blew In, which was also run by a female proprietress, just like Room 13, just like the speakeasy we're broadcasting from. So it all kind of comes full circle. And I think that's all the stalling that I need to do. So I'll get out of here, turn it over to Adam. Thank you guys again for being here. Give him a nice round of applause.
Hey, thanks everybody. Thanks, Patty. Hi to everybody watching online today. If you have the packet or the link, you can see the very first picture there is Lillian Collier wearing an awesome hat and standing there with what could only be described as a shit-eating grin while the building behind her is on fire. It reminds me of that meme with a little girl grinning while the house is on fire. And she was in fact arrested for arson that day, but she was quickly released. She'd been spending a lot of time with the police over the previous couple of months. We are actually this very week, within a couple of days of the 100th anniversary of the time that her place was raided. She was a teenage flapper who ran a tea room called the Wind Blew In. The cops raided it not so much because of rumors that she was serving liquor there, which she most certainly was, but because of rumors that she was hosting petting parties there. And either she or her partner told a judge that night, "Your Honor, we swear there is no snuggle pupping at the Wind Blew In." As soon as I saw that, that's my favorite word ever now, snuggle pupping. It's like cuddling, but somehow more illicit and thrilling. One who enjoyed it was known as a snuggle puppy. Well, we'll tell the whole story of Lily and then how I researched her and how I eventually solved the mystery of whatever became of her in a few minutes. Brief introduction for myself. As Patty mentioned, I run Mysterious Chicago tours. We do virtual tours every day on our Facebook page at 10 o'clock and full-length tours every Thursday night and every Sunday morning. And then in season we do walking tours as well. I've been in this business for just about 20 years now. I got my start working for one of the ghost tour companies. I just answered a Craigslist ad. Now, I was an English major who graduated in the George Bush economy. I had to make up my own jobs. There wasn't when he was hiring anything. But I became suspicious that the stories they were teaching me might not be entirely accurate on the ghost tour. Smartphones were starting to come out, so I was getting a little bit nervous that somebody might fact check me in real time. So I started going back and researching stuff, and then I'd already been looking up stuff since I got into the town, and really just one thing led to another. But one of the first real rabbit holes that I fell down was Chicago Bohemia in the 1920s. And really that was one of the first things I did upon moving here right after college. Is when I was a kid, there was this book called The Snark Out Boys and the Avocado of Death by Daniel Pinkwater. Pinkwater was like Vonnegut for kids. One of the Snark Out Boys was a very thinly veiled, thinly disguised story about Chicago in the 1950s. He and his friends sneak out to the Snark Theater, which is based on the Clark Theater, where they would have a different weird double bill running 23 hours a day. They'd have to close for an hour to clean up. Then afterwards, they would walk to a place called Blueberry Park where people made speeches. People just got up on soapboxes and made speeches. That turned out to be based on a place called Bughouse Square, officially Newbury Park. And if you look at picture number 2 on there, that's a view of Bughouse Square as of 1905. Now, this was a popular place starting around then. For the rumor that everybody always told was that the land had been left to the city to use as a park on the condition that, 2 conditions. One was that they had to build a wall around it. And if you look closely, you can see there's a curve around it. He didn't specify how high the wall had to be. So in the grand Chicago fashion, they built a 2-inch wall. The other condition was supposed to be that anybody who wanted to had to be allowed to make a speech there at any time. And this became a popular thing. Up until about the 1950s, you could go in there at any time and there'd be, on a good night, thousands of people cramming around, standing on soapboxes and heckling people who were on soapboxes. When I first started researching it after moving to town, there were still people around who would tell me it was really great back in the day, but then radio came along. These people were like 100 years old by then. But the conventional wisdom has always been that television killed these places, but the old-timers thought that it was never the same after radio. But back in the 1910s, there were all these regulars who hung around there, guys with names like One-Armed Charlie Wendorf and Herbert the Cosmic Kid. And some of these guys were out there for decades. There's one newspaper article I found that transcribed what was going on there, what everybody was saying in the debate. The topic that day was that the newspaper article had just been that a UFO had crash-landed in Roswell, New Mexico. So there's actually a transcript of what they were all saying there that night. It was mostly a bunch of lunatics, frankly. But the whole neighborhood around there that grew up over time was kind of a natural to be artsy, because if you look at slide number 3, that is Tree Studios. And that was built on the land of a guy named H.H. McGee, who was a dry goods merchant. He had a gorgeous tomb at Graceland Cemetery, but then a few years after he died, his son-in-law, Judge Lambert Tree, had everybody hauled out of there and reburied someplace else so he could sell the mausoleum to another guy. If I were H.H. McGee, I would haunt the crap out of that kid. But frankly, it was a pretty good move. But Judge Tree also tore down H.H. McGee's old house and rebuilt Tree Studios there as an artist colony. It was one of the first really big artist colonies in the city, and the building, at least, is still around today. And by the 1890s, there were all kinds of newspaper articles about the mad, mad lives of these artist types who live at Tree Studios. It has always been popular to make fun of hipsters. It's always an easy joke for people. They would talk about these people who kind of lived in hovels and didn't seem to care about money. They only really cared about art. And in particular, slide number 4 is a picture of a baby. One day around 1905, somebody left a baby on the doorstep of Tree Studios. There were plenty of places where you could leave a baby on the doorstep in Chicago in those days. Places would advertise about it. Don't just let them die, bring them over here. But for some reason, people left it at the big doorstep of Tree Studios, and all of the artists who were living there said, "Can we keep him?" And they announced they were going to raise this baby to be an artist. They named him Baby Rembrandt. And donations started pouring in. They would raise him in the ways of the Bohemians, in the ways of the artists. Eventually, he was adopted formally by some couple connected with the studio. They gave him a different name. I've never found out exactly whatever became of Baby Rembrandt. Most likely, the kid probably never heard the story of his early days. But all this was situated just above the Chicago River, just above the Loop, and right above that was the Gold Coast. Late 19th century, very early 20th century, that was the place to be. There were all these great old mansions, these old Richardsonian Romanesque places. But by the early 20th century, everything Victorian was going completely out of style. People who could afford to live like that didn't want to live like that. So mansion after mansion all over the Gold Coast got broken up into artist studios. So you had that, you had Bughouse Square already there, you had Tree Studios right down nearby. And then in 1912 on Cass Street, Harriet Monroe, the sister-in-law of John Wellborn Root, started Poetry Magazine, which became a really big deal. Like everybody who wanted to make it as a poet had to come to Chicago and try to impress Harriet Monroe with their poetry. So now you had a big poetry hub, you had an artist studio, you had Bughouse Square, you had mansions broken up into artist studios. So this whole area around the water tower came to be known as Tower Town. It came to be in the early 20th century, particularly around the 1910s, people started talking about this as Chicago's own left bank. This was like Chicago's answer to Montmartre and Greenwich Village in New York, where all of the artists lived. I'll talk about just a few of the places. The old timers in the Gold Coast, some of them were still around. And they would complain quite a bit because these new people were moving in with their phonograph records. One person was quoted as saying, "You see, these blue book folks don't understand the impalpable value of aesthetics. They have little comprehension of the bohemian mind. We thought that by renting the place, we could play our phonograph albums at any hour of the day we wanted." I don't know whose side to take in this one. Over at 10 East Grand, where the Hilton is now, there was a place called the Green Mask that was very fondly remembered. It was, a lot of these places were very much like where we are right now, other than this place has carpet. This place has carpet, a little bit better electric lighting, but there was one common thing when people remember all these cafes and tea rooms that sprouted up around the Bohemia of Tower Town. It was always really complicated to get into them. You had to walk through somebody's apartment door, then go down a staircase, then through another door, then up another staircase, until eventually you came to the place where you were going. And they were always remarkably known for being dirty. One of them was described as about as dark as a crypt, and that wasn't the only comparison you could make to a crypt inside of there. In most of the cases, we don't really have too much of this sort of thing, too much to remember this sort of thing. One guy wrote, "These people around here are peculiar people, these near North Siders. That is, the near North Side is a peculiar mixture of a vastly different kinds of people. There are artists, writers, and would-be writers, Bible students, society people, millionaires, radicals, rovers, bums, medical, law, and dental students, commerce students, art students, chorus boys, actors and actresses, waitresses, taxi drivers, interior decorators, nightclub performers, models, racetrack louts, handbook operators, pseudo-bohemians, and just plain ordinary folks." The one guy also read a whole thing. "Yeah, they seem to be very free, all right. Freedom from bathtubs, anyway." The Green Mask was generally a place where artists hung out. Most of what we really know about it just comes from a couple of paragraphs that Kenneth Rexroth later wrote about it. But he talked about he would go in there and Langston Hughes would be reading poetry, then he would read some poetry, Sherwood Anderson would be hanging around, sometimes Ben Hecht would come through, maybe Hemingway now and then. Really a who's who of popular writers of the early 1920s were said to hang out there. And Rexroth even said that he used to read poetry there accompanied by live jazz music. Now, 30 years later, this would get to be a real cliche, reading poetry with jazz in the background. Some people would credit it as wow, he invented that. And he would say, no, people have been doing stuff like this for a really long time. It might have been the first with that kind of poetry and that kind of jazz. It was certainly pioneering. But most of what we really know about it on the record, I couldn't find a picture of it for the life of me. It was right at Grandin State, right where the Hilton is now. At the time, it was described as being in the basement of a bunch of limestone-fronted houses. Trying to find a picture of that for a while. It was, the limestone-fronted houses by 1920 were a brothel, which actually worked out well for the Green Mask because they got raided by the cops a few times, but then the brothel started paying the cops off. And staying away from the basement was just included in the price. There was a raid in 1923. There was a guy, he's given different names in two different articles. One of them is Lawrence Tibers. He was fined $300 for reading obscene poetry when the cops raided the place. The judge said, "The stuff you are reading to these young people turns my stomach. If anyone read such slime to my son, I would horsewhip him. Anyone guilty of such an offense against decency is unfit to live. This guy was not playing around. It was probably just very light homoerotic stuff too. It's generally remembered, though not very well documented, that there were a lot of early, they called them pansy parlors at the time. A couple of them we actually have names on, a couple of them we have better data. They weren't strictly limited to Towertown, there were a couple in Bronzeville as well. But it was definitely known that there were like cross-dressing bars and things of that nature, or people like that would hang around there quite a bit. Now, adjacent to Bughouse Square was a little alley called Tooker Place. It's still, if you zoom in on maps, it usually still calls this little alley Tooker Place. Inside of that, one of the harder places to get into, you had to walk down an alley that was just about wide enough to fit through, then climb through a hole in the wall. To get to the place out of all of these that is probably the best documented, which was the Dill Pickle Club. There's a couple of pictures. Picture number 5 is Tooker Alley itself. It's a really good picture of it that's in the Dill Pickle archives at the Newberry Library. And the one after that is a picture of the doorway to get in, taken during the day, which said, "Step high, stoop low, and leave your dignity outside." Now, the Dill Pickle was a bunch of different things. Essentially, it was a coffee shop. They had tolerable food that nobody could ever remember the details of, mostly soft drinks. One night a week, they would have dances where they would bring in a band. One night a week, they would put on plays that were almost always some kind of socialist fable. And most nights of the week, they had debates there. The proprietor, Jack Jones, said he would just bring in anybody who was a nut about something. So they could have all sorts of debates, and some major people, like Captain Streeter of Streeterville, came and spoke one night. The Chicago Tribune said he covered everything but the ethical code of the dinosaurs. Yellow Kid Vile, the con artist, would come in to do a demonstration of a confidence act, and he would come in and take the audience for $10. They knew that he was there to do a confidence act, but he would still manage to convince them that that he needed the $10. Now, the next couple of pictures are advertisements. One of them is an open forum Saturday night coming up at the Dill Pickle. It's very fortunate that we have these things. Of all of these places, the Dill lasted the longest, was the most reminisced about, made the news the most often. Carl Sandburg said it was the most happening place in town. And now they have an archive that you can go rooting around in over at the Newberry Library, including some of these flyers. Like this one, on January 8th, Victor Lindlar, MD, will be discussing the physiology and significance of flappers and cake eaters. Cake eater was like a male flapper. Took me a while to figure that one out. It still sounds like a mean thing to call somebody, you cake eater. The next night, Dr. Ben Reitman. Ben Reitman was the hobo philosopher. He was Emma Goldman's non-monogamous primary partner, off and on. Gave lectures to hobos a lot, operated the Hobo College, was a fairly well-known anarchist, and he was at all of these places. He just kind of haunted Towertown. He's connected to just about all of these places, was always making speeches. This night he would be talking about life and death in Bohemia. Eventually he got a car, and then everybody started thinking he was a sellout. Yellow Kid Vile gave the eulogy when he died. I just found that one out today. Then there would be a speech about the American Legion, and probably skip that night. And then Dr. John Luttenberger would give a talk called "Does Nature Compensate?" I don't know. Next flyer, Mae West and her ensemble from the play Sex, which had been shut down in a couple of cities. We're going to show up there. A guy would give a talk about the biology of life and death, one about the decay of aristocracy. That was probably a pretty common subject there. Dr. Benjamin H. Breakstone on the rejuvenation of man. This was also right around the period when people had it in their heads that you could have your own testicles removed and replaced with either a younger man's balls or goat balls, or gorilla in some case. Harold Fowler McCormick had it done. That was going around at the time. And then the next week, Harry P. Moore would discuss further aspects on the most striking literary figure of our time. It doesn't say who. I'm guessing he meant himself. This place lasted through the whole of the 1920s. People reminisced and told stories about it for years, but one person who comes up occasionally, Rex Roth mentioned it, or a couple of the other reminiscences, was a girl who was only about 18 when she started going there named Lillian Collier, who was a circus performer by trade. And I had first found out about her just Googling around, looking up this Bohemia stuff, trying to find out more stuff about Bughouse Square, more stuff about the Dill Pickle, hoping I could find a ghost story so I could add on to the ghost tour. That never quite worked out. But there was this article from 1924, which you can see, it's picture number 10. There's one of Lillian and her aide slash friend that was generally believed to be her girlfriend, Virginia Harrison. But next to it, there's this article, Is Today's Girl Becoming a Savage? And it shows this awesome-looking young woman sitting there holding up a book. A British noblewoman named Lady Balfour had just been complaining about these flappers of today in 1924, saying, "What do we see today? Young women with lips gashed out of all human resemblance. She is drunk with liberty and run amok from license. The ruin of a nation rests in the palm of her flippant hands." You'd see this a lot at the time. You know, this is the 1920s. More young women were living on their own and working jobs than ever before. And you would see letters to the editors all the time, people complaining, like, these women don't get out of the way of the train seats for their elders. And women would write in saying, "Yeah, we've been working all day. We want to sit down at the end of a long work day. What have you been doing all day?" But in response to these comments, they sought out Lillian Collier, who had been known in the city for a while. And what she said was, "Lady Balfour had best know the flapper before she condemns her. Women too long have had to play the role of the underdog. Now women has broken the traditional bond. The women of yesterday was a box of suppressed desires. The flapper of today typifies understanding. She is the product of a new age turning toward the light. The flapper yearns for good. What then if she does use a bit of powder, smoke a cigarette, or wear the perfume so highly displeasing to Lady Balfour? Isn't that better than doing all these things in the privacy of the boudoir? You can bet it is, and regardless of what Lady Balfour says, the flapper will survive." I read that article, I love this girl. I need to find out more about her. And it turned out that a couple of years before, Lillian had opened a place of her own at right where the Under Armour store would eventually be on Michigan and Ohio. Now this was at a time when it wasn't quite the Magnificent Mile yet. Everybody knew that it was going to be, but they had just built the Michigan Avenue Bridge. They had just kicked Captain Streeter out of the place after fighting with him over land rights for 30 years. The Wrigley Building was now being built, so everybody knew this. Before the 1920s, North Michigan Avenue wasn't even called Michigan Avenue yet. It was still a dirt road called Pine Street. But after they built the bridge, they changed the name to make it all fit in a little bit better. Towers started going up, but it was still at the time mostly Tower Town. The plaza around what is now Pioneer Court was always artists set up on their easels trying to sell things to tourists. So right in the middle of that, in a building that had previously been a gas station, Lillian and her friend slash aide slash girlfriend, as she's variously described, had opened a place called the Wind Blew Inn. I'll lead a couple of her things. She said, "I tried to make it a place of artistic tone and spiritual uplift, as much like Greenwich Village as possible. But it wasn't possible because the dirt is so different in Greenwich Village. In spite of these handicaps, I maintain that it is the best restaurant ever made out of an old gasoline station." The Wind Blew Inn was designed as a place where artists and writers could foregather and discuss the arts. The windows are kept gray to give that cathedral interior to the dining room. The plumber's candles on every table give a mellow light and don't cost as much as electric light. And as for the door being locked, that's just to keep out the rowdies. Now, the door, it had a regular front door, unlike you didn't have to go through a bunch of elevators or up one set of staircases and down another, but the door was kept locked. You had to knock to get in. But they seem to have let pretty much anybody into the place. They got raided by cops pretty regularly. Lillian, before that, if you look at picture number 11, the job that she worked as a day job when she first opened this was a circus performer. I haven't found too much. I know she worked for the Sells Floto Circus. There's that one photograph. It wasn't a job that she seemed to have had for very long. After that, the picture after that, picture number 12, shows her up on a girder, working as a construction worker, which she did for one day, not really to work the job, but she was working for the Chicago Post, the newspaper. The Post, it was either the Post or the Herald Examiner. She worked for a few different Chicago papers. Later she would remember they would give her assignments like go out into the street and faint and see what happens and then write about it. This particular day, another time they had her go like hang a banner, climb up a flagpole to hang a banner and then climb back down. In this case, it was go work on construction on one of these skyscrapers going up for a day. And you can write about that. I've only ever found that one article. Life magazine found the original photograph and put it on their webpage a while ago. They didn't know the whole story behind her, but I really freaked out when I saw that one. Every now and then somebody still finds a new picture of her floating around someplace. The Herald Examiner, I think it was, referred to her as our little girl reporter. Which is partly because she was only like 17 at the time. It wasn't like women reporters were a novelty by then. It was some of the best writers for the newspapers at the time, especially in the crime stuff, had been women for 15, 20 years by then. But after a period of working as a writer, she was hanging out at the Dill Pickle. People remembered that she wrote charming poetry and was the darling of the Dill Pickle. One person remembered that you could, even if things were slow that night, you could just enjoy Lillian Collier's wisecracks. But then eventually she started up her own place, The Wind Blew In. And if you go to the next couple of pictures, these are ads for things that were going on there. Writers, artists, and others meet kindred souls every night in the week at The Wind Blew In, 116 East Ohio near Michigan. Lecture Sunday at 8, What Art Means to Me, by an artist, a writer, a designer, a matinee idol. Ben Reitman, chairman. Because of course it was Ben Reitman. And that forum reminds me of this sketch comedy show. There was a show in the 90s called The State. You see guys from it all over the place now. But one night they had one of their sketches was they were going to have a big artsy intellectual TV show, a panel discussion on what is art. They go around, introduce people like an artist, a writer, a designer, a matinee idol. So that was our question. What is art? And one guy says, you mean like paintings and stuff? Like, that's correct. Good night, everybody. So the next week they had writers, artists, and others meet kindred spirits, etc. The Wind Blew In. Sam Putnam, poet, editor, and newspaperman, will lecture on 4 young Chicago poets: Emmanuel Carnavelli, Oscar Williams, Jun Fujita, and Mark Turnbull. Now, Jun Fujita was a Japanese-American photojournalist. If you've ever seen pictures of the aftermath of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, those are all by him. Apparently, 10 years before, he had been a well-known young Chicago poet. I didn't know that till I found this ad like yesterday. His grandnephew saw it on Twitter and got very excited about it. This gives us some idea of what was going on there. Now, this place was visited. It started attracting attention. Newspaper reporters went there partly to see if they would actually be able to get liquor there. And Lillian was smart enough. She knew when somebody was there to write about her, and she would tell people, oh, we check everybody for hip liquor and everything in this place. Most churches don't even do that. But other people who wrote about it years and years later said, yeah, you went in there and paid 75 cents for a cup of tea. And that's like a $20 cup of tea if you adjust for inflation. There was definitely something a little bit stronger in there. But the rumor was that she was hosting petting parties there, make-out parties. So we're just about within a couple of days, I believe it was February 13th of 1922, just a few days from now is the 100th anniversary of the cops broke into the place and arrested every single person. And newspaper reporters happened to be there when they were brought before the judge, and the police started talking about it, saying, there's always action down at the Wind Blew In. They're always making too much noise. They had a guy who ran a rooming house next door named Albert Otto came in and said, a Boilermaker must play that piano of theirs. The newspapers said that the neighbors complained about the syncopated blues music. They put blues in quotes. I love that. And the officers told the judge, well, we went in there and there was this obscene painting up on the wall. And Lillian said, that's not obscene, it's a futuristic painting of a silo. Sure. We can probably all imagine what it must have looked like without too much trouble here. Let's see if I can find, there was a great quote one of the cops had. They came in and found that people were smoking cigarettes and cuddled up in unnatural poses. I'm trying to picture what they might have meant by an unnatural pose. I can picture a few things, but I don't see what's so unnatural about them. I guess to a guy in the 1920s, maybe. So, an unconventional attitude, smoking cigarettes and covering up. Now, the judge decided to continue the case. Lillian and Virginia made their case saying, no, we're not running an indecent place. It's the best restaurant ever made out of a gasoline station. We check everybody for hip liquor and everything. It was either Lillian or Virginia who said, Your Honor, we solemnly swear there is no snuggle pupping at the Wind Blew Inn. So the judge let everybody go, but continued Lillian Virginia's case to the next month. A couple of weeks later, the cops broke in again and made her cover up all of the nude statues that she had decorating the place. And she initially said, the cops come in here oftener than the customers. There's nothing wrong with the place. The cops just didn't get their usual handout, that's all. Then it went on to say, I'm going to talk to the mayor about you. He's my friend. Now, it's hard to imagine she would have been that good of friends with Big Bill Thompson, who is probably the most corrupt mayor of Chicago we has ever had, which of course is saying something. But she was able to get a restraining order against the cops a couple of weeks later. I have no idea how she managed to pull that off. The chief of police said, well, that stinks. If the courts want to open up these places, why should I care? No one else does. Probably was just mad that he didn't get his usual handout. Now, this started making national news again. There was a widely circulated article, one of the first things I could find on Lillian. When I first started researching her, the Chicago Tribune was about the only big paper from the vicinity that had been digitized yet. If you were looking on the newspaper sites online, you were looking up like the Modesto Bee, or maybe the Rock Island Argus if you were lucky. It was mostly a lot of small market papers. The big ones hadn't really been digitized yet, unless you were going through a local library. But there was one of them that was circulated all over the place where Lillian lamented that Chicago was just such a hick town. And at the time you would see like a cow walk past her place on Michigan Avenue every now and then. Now she said, I must preach the gospel of real life. Too many folks just in from the Corn Belt. You know, there aren't many real people here. I mean, those who do big things, those who see the light. But I'll try to struggle on. Bohemianism will come to Chicago, but it will take years, perhaps ages. I am willing to sacrifice myself to make that a step nearer. You can kind of imagine what she'd be like on TikTok. I've been using that line so much it used to be on MySpace. And then it was on Tumblr. I think she would have had a great Tumblr. Now, if you look at picture number 17, about 2 weeks, eventually they went in front of the judge. The judge sentenced them, Lillian and Virginia, to read a book of fairy tales. He said, the only thing that's the matter with you is you seem to have a false value of the things of life. Have you ever read Little Women or Flaxie Frizzle or the works of Hans Christian Andersen? And Lillian said, well, we read the bedtime stories in the newspapers. And he said, well, you've just got a false value of the things of life. Get a book of fairy tales at the library, start on that right away, pounded his gavel. They dutifully walked across the street to get a book of fairy tales and promised to read them. Did not necessarily cure them of the Bohemian ideals. In fact, as we'll see with Virginia, it got a little bit, it kind of went in the wrong direction completely. This sentence kind of made the news, you know, young women sentenced to read fairy tales. It's kind of, I get the impression from looking up some of the judge's other cases that it was really just kind of his sense of humor. He was always making cracks like that. Just about the same week, there was a guy who was brought in from him. He had been trying to rob a place after hours, but he bumped into the jukebox and started it up. And that alerted the people in the building, so he was caught, and the judge said, it's another example of jazz music leading to a young man's downfall. But about 2 weeks after that sentence was passed, the Wind Blew Inn burned down. And that was that picture right at the beginning of Lillian standing there watching it burn. She was brought in for arson. She was quickly cleared, but after talking, it sounded like the real culprit had been Virginia. Virginia had been seen walking around the place looking really angry and threatening to get even, and had been seen buying a can of gasoline about a block away. She then disappeared from the scene. As of a couple of years later, she was still wanted for arson back in Chicago. So, if they had been girlfriends, apparently they must have had a really big fight that night. I actually found some reason to think about what the fight might have been about just recently. We'll get to that right about at the end. So, after that, Lillian tried to open another version of the Wind Blew Inn that was on LaSalle and Randolph, right next to the police station at the time. They made a lot about that. The thing is, the new one that she opened was not only too far from Tower Town, it was also too nice. As one person remembered, when you paid 75 cents for a cup of tea, you wanted to get some dirt. You wanted something a little bit more thrilling than this. So the one on LaSalle Street didn't last very long. About 2 years later, she gave that interview about the flappers represent a new era of opportunity for women, and then disappeared off of the record completely. Now, there were some hints that Lillian Collier might not have been her real name, which made her especially hard to research. I tried things at the legal archives, tried to look up records from the cases, couldn't really find anything that would back me up. Talked to a couple other people who had found these stories and looked her up as well. Nobody could quite figure out what had ever become of her. There's a great picture, number 18, if you go to that one. It's a picture of Virginia sitting there smiling and Lillian looking very goth. She was sometimes remembered as a very sullen person. That's picture number 18. Now the next one is a picture of a book cover. That was a book I did about 5 years ago called Just Kill Me. It was written a couple of years before that. It was all about a ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing people at them. It was only partly autobiographical. But if you were ever a problem customer on one of my old ghost tours, you probably ended up getting written into that book. But I decided one of the background things was I would have the girl who's in the story research Lillian Collier and try to find out what happened with her. So if I got so excited about her story, other people probably would too. So I decided when I was working, I was like, you know what? I got to figure this one out. If I'm going to put out this book all about Lillian Collier, I need to roll up my sleeves and find out what happened to her for real. So I started digging around more and more. If you look at picture number 20 there, picture number 20 is a newspaper article from the time that the place got raided. I'd gotten most of the stuff off of the microfilm reels already. But this one I noticed towards the end, it mentioned that at the hearing, Lillian's mother was there. And they gave her mother's name as Nellie Lieberman. It's like, aha. So we probably have either Lillian's real last name or her maiden name here, Lillian Lieberman. Okay. So by going through that, nobody had been able to find Lillian Collier anywhere in the census records from 1920 either. But when I looked up Nellie Lieberman, that one came up right away, along with her father Meyer Lieberman. There were two other Liebermans in the house, plus a Lillian Colty, it looked like. So really it was just badly scribbled out and not very well transcribed. That kind of thing happens with people transcribing the census all the time. They lived in a little place over on Levitt Street. And from that, I was able to get her age and her parents' age and where her parents came from, and that was able to move back a little bit further, found out that she had been born in New York in 1901. The family moved to Baltimore shortly after that. And in Baltimore, they did churn up a little bit in Baltimore. There were a couple of letters to the editor that came up to give us some idea of her childhood. One of them was in 1912. Her mother wrote a letter to the editor when they asked for people to write in, and they asked for women to write in and say, there's all this talk about women's rights now. How do you want your husbands to act? And, well, I'll read just an excerpt from Nellie's letter to the editor, which was called, Must Assert His Rights. A good, quiet, obedient husband would be disliked and tormented by all, especially by his wife. If he went out to smoke his pipe in the shed, he would soon find himself eating his dinner there, and very soon would, like the suffragette, have to fight for his rights to be considered and recognized as a human being. Women, like the frogs in Aesop's fable, would not be satisfied with a log for a king. So basically, her point is, give us our rights, treat us like an equal, but don't be a pushover. There's especially the line there, he shouldn't have to go out to the shed to smoke his pipe. It reminds me very much of what Lillian said 12 years later. It's like, so what if we smoke cigarettes? Shouldn't we do that out in the open, not just in our boudoirs? Also, right next to it, I'll hold this up, I'll see if how well you guys can see it. The letter next to hers was entitled, Women Love Domination. That won second prize in the Baltimore newspaper. But a couple of years later, when Lillian was 14, she had also written a poem. This would be her first published work. She wrote a poem called The Coming of Love. And I'll read it now. I wish we had some jazz going. One cold day in winter as Jack Frost came sailing by, in a little boat all made of clouds from way up in the sky, he looked upon the dreary world as busy as a bee, but not the smallest bit of love or kindness could he see. Everyone was hurrying, everyone was sad. Thought he, dear me, what must I do to make the people glad? And so he brought dear Cupid, the little god of love. He stole from him his mother and the ones that lived above. and took him to the sad world, the sorry ones to cheer, and now he comes from heaven on one day in every year. All right. The snapping thing is generally agreed to have started at the Gaslight Cafe a few years after this, so they would have been clapping if the wind blew in. At least I think so, anyway. So they're still kind of, I was able to back up a little bit. This trail was still going cold. Now the next picture up, I think, is, there's the census is picture number 21. 22 is Meyer Lieberman's draft card. That was her father. I had been through all of it. Her mother's maiden name was Sorensen. They had been married at a certain day, and you could find marriage records for them and everything. Then we got the music. So from that, I was able to find a Meyer Lieberman draft card. And the draft card for World War II, he would have been too old to most likely be drafted by then. But I was able to say, okay, he's got the date, his place of birth lines up, his date of birth lines up. This is quite likely the same Meyer Lieberman. And then among the draft card is, what is the name of someone who will always know your address? And he picked Lillian Gerard. So, okay, that's a clue. Looked up Lillian Gerard in the same sentence, and she was living with a person, Lillian Gerard was living with a woman named Nellie Sorensen, which was her mother's maiden name. So all of this started clicking together pretty well. So I started looking up Lillian Gerard, immediately found Lillian Gerard had been the real name of an author named Nelise Child, who had written, who was best known at the time. She had written a play that was put on Broadway for a week by the Group Theater Project. So I immediately found out that somebody had just published the script to the play she had written, which was called Weep for the Virgins. I think I've got that up. That's picture number 25. But I wrote to that place. I wrote to the place that had published it, and they said, oh, well, you want to talk to her son? I said, yes, I want to talk to her son. So I ended up talking to her son quite a bit. Well, we'll go back a little ways from other things that I was able to piece together. One of them I just found. Picture number 23 is a picture of her when she was living in California. It turned out that after her adventures with the Wind Blew In, she had married a guy named Frank Gerard, and they moved to California to work on Cannery Row for a while. And they went in and out of living in Hollywood and working in Cannery Row. She made the news once in 1934 when she was the woman who discovered a woman named June DeLong walking along in sort of a daze. And what happened was this was tied into what was called the Hollywood Morals Trial. It was a really big story for a few weeks in 1934, but nobody really famous was involved, so it's kind of fallen out of fashion now. June DeLong had moved to Hollywood to become an actress, but the only work she could find was being a hand stand-in. She had beautiful hands, so when big actors were working and there was a close-up on their hands, they would often bring in someone like June to do the card shuffling and things. But in an attempt to get more work, she was doing what pretty much everybody was doing, which was sleeping with the head of Central Casting. And one day, somebody had walked into her apartment, and there was her and another woman in bed with the head of Central Casting, and he jumped up and said, what is this, some kind of a frame-up? And there ended up being a whole trial. The whole thing he said was they had set the whole thing up. I just went over there to have a meeting with her, then she took off her clothes and somebody else busted into the room. They're all just trying to bribe me to get more film work. I think they eventually acquitted the guy. But at one point in it, June DeLong took a whole bunch of sleeping pills and was found out wandering in the street by Nelise Child. But Nelise at the time was already writing. She had written a mystery novel called Murder Comes Home. There's a picture of that on number 24. And then she did another about the same time called The Diamond Ransom Murders. But when she got the word that the Group Theater wanted to put on her play Weep for the Virgin, she hopped freight trains all the way to New York. The reviews were absolutely brutal. It was only put on for about a week. It's kind of a common thing. She became a playwright after this. Over the course of the next 25 years, she had several things produced. The reviews are almost invariably pretty bad. Her books were very well regarded. She was especially popular overseas. The Diamond Ransom Murders was a big hit in France and a minor hit in England. Not much of a splash in the U.S. But they were sold. And number 26 is her headshot from around that time. And then in the 1940s, she switched gear a little bit more. By then she had a little baby, Frank, who, as of a few years ago, was still around. and was writing more serious novels. She was writing one called The Wolf Comes Home and one called If I Go, or some, I can't remember the exact title off the top of my head. I could, under normal circumstances I could, but there's a lot of facts in my head right now. They were more serious novels. Her publisher even set one up for nomination for the Pulitzer Prize, which publishers can do that with any book, but they don't waste their time on ones that they don't think have even the barest chance. So there's this picture of her. They were living out in California at the time, and she was effectively working, spending her time as a housewife. She had redesigned the kitchen, said, I wanted to design this so that I could get the maximum amount of work done with the absolute minimum effort, so I would then have time to go back and work on writing. Now, she had worked. She worked in the Cannery Row for a while. She'd been a bookkeeper. Of course, she'd run her own business. But her story at the time was her husband didn't like her working. So she had quit to just focus on writing in the afternoons while the baby was asleep. It's possibly, you can kind of see the seeds of this in the article when she talked about, oh, my husband didn't want me writing. They got divorced about a year later. She married a guy by the name of Abner Rosenfeld, who, according to one article, had been her high school sweetheart like 20 years before. Now, she had apparently gotten married once when she was 17. That's where the name Collie comes from. There is a marriage license taken out for Lillian Lieberman and Herbert Collie. But only a year after that is the census where she's in Chicago. Herbert was already out of the picture within a year. I'd love to know more of what that story was. But that one, the trail kind of goes cold. Now, number 28 is a book that she contributed to. This is one of my favorite finds, was a book called Chicago Murders. It's like, wow, she had my same job. It was an anthology that was published of stories of famous murders in Chicago. One of the stories in it was H.H. Holmes. There's one about Thomas Neal Cream in there. Her own story was about a woman named Mildred Bolton, who just a couple of years before had shot her husband to death in his office and was only spared from the electric chair like the very last second. I'll just read a bit of an, I'll read about the first page of it. Joseph Bolton, the almost indestructible husband by Nellie's Child. And incidentally, her the pseudonym Nellie's Child was just saying Nellie's Child quickly. But it also would specify it's pronounced Nellie's, emphasis on the east, rhymes with peace. The most common crime in the homicidal calendar, the crime of passion, is still a relatively rare form of self-indulgence. Everyone has experienced rage of an ego snarling for blood, and almost everyone has resisted its demands. If wishes were horses, some of our best friends would be trampled to death. When they actually occur, crimes of passion are usually a pushover for the police and a headache for the jury. It seems to this specialist, however, that these affairs are complicated by the existence of a natural flair which takes them out of the pure crime of passion class. A gentleman who sells his wife for sausage or pretends she has been shot in a holdup may have good reasons for his crimes, but they are not passionate. A genuine crime of passion finds the guilty person standing dumbly beside the body of the victim, a bloody knife or a smoking pistol in hand, or sharing floor space with the object of affection and full of self-inflicted wounds. Usually, when a man shoots a woman, he attempts his own life. When a woman shoots a man, she seems to think that's enough for one day. And that was the case with Mildred Bolton in any case. If you look at picture number 29, that is Lillian and Vincent Starrett at the Marshall Fields bookstore autographing party for this. The Marshall Fields, they had at their Oak Park, Evanston, and Chicago locations, they had copies of this book for sale that were autographed by 5 of the 7 authors. I still see copies of it with all the autographs pop up on the collectible market all the time. They're a little bit, Vincent Starrett was fairly famous in his own day. He was best remembered now as a Sherlock Holmes scholar. He wrote a fairly famous sonnet about Holmes and Watson. Here, though the world explode, these two survive, and it is always 1895. He wrote a book called The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which is known to every Sherlock Holmes buff. He's got a fantastic Sherlock Holmes-themed gravestone over at Graceland Cemetery, in fact. So because of him, the price of autographed copies of this is fairly high. But they still do pop up occasionally. I thought it was a fantastic shot. There was a website about him that got a hold of these pictures and put them up, having no idea who Lillian Collier / Nellie's Child was. So I was writing them all these excited, do you know who this is? The next picture, number 30, is her in her 50s, her late 50s. She was living in Florida for a while, still writing plays, and this one, the person on the far right in the picture is Irene Castle, who had formerly been a huge silent film star. And in the 50s was a pretty good friend of Lillian Collier. This play was her very last stage appearance, which she wouldn't have done at all, except apparently she did it just as a favor to Lillian, because they were good friends. Once again, the reviews were not particularly good. And the next picture after that, we'll skip ahead, the next picture I have of her is her in 1976. That's her with her son. It's, I guess in the packet, I think it's on the back of page 1. Upside down. He was able to send me that. It's an absolutely fabulous picture. She still looked fantastic at 75, I think. Now, the most recent thing I found of her writing is I just yesterday found a Chicago Jewish publication has been digitized recently, and in 1962 she wrote an article called "Look, Look, the Valley, How Beautiful" about a 6-week trip that she and her husband had taken to Israel. It's a really interesting read now. She went to an Israel that was run by secular socialist types who had gone to camps to learn Yiddish and were working on draining the swamp and were bragging like, look, we don't need to import zippers from overseas. We can make our own buttons. And it was where it was widely believed that nobody needs the luxury of an automobile of their own. That's why the taxes are like 100% if you own a car. It's really a fascinating read now. Also, they found that so many people didn't speak even as much Yiddish as the average American Jew. Like, they asked a couple of people, do you know where shul is? And they said, shul who? But, of course, naturally, I asked Frank, her son, Frank disappeared off social media a couple of years ago. I'm not sure where he is. I haven't found an obituary or anything, but he's into his mid-80s. He had just moved out of New York. He had just lost his husband of 50 years. So that was kind of an interesting thing for me to say. Is like, she apparently she never really talked too much about her life in Chicago, but he remembered her talking about the Dill Pickle Club a bit. So you don't forget a name like that. And I asked him, well, did you ever hear that she ran a place that's widely credited as one of the first gay hangouts in Chicago? And of course he was thrilled to hear that. He hadn't actually heard that. And I said, well, there's also been some speculation. Did you ever mention this Virginia Harrison that might have been more than friends? And he thought for a second, well, you know, that would explain a lot. He didn't know for sure, but it was entirely possible. Later, he even sent me an email with the name of another woman that later he suspected she might have had an affair with. That was the wife of a well-known playwright. And said, well, it didn't bother her one bit when I came out in the 1970s. So we still don't know for sure, but it sounds like it's entirely plausible in any case. That was a kind of a cool thing to get to tell him. He himself, he wrote about her a little bit. He said that we lived in New York most of the time. After she divorced and married Abner, who I consider my real father, we lived in New York. We were in the front row of opening night of every Broadway play in the 1950s and 60s. Then I started a band. She loved our music. Eventually, she moved back to Chicago. She spent her last years living in a place up on North Sheridan. We went and visited for the morning mini tour yesterday over on the Mysterious Chicago Facebook page. And this just leaves one real unopened question, is what became of Virginia Harrison, the firebug? If you look at the very last picture, picture number 32, that's Virginia Harrison with her baby under the headline, Bandit Queen Wanted. So, I still don't know exactly whatever became of Virginia Harrison, but I know what happened to her the next couple of years after this. Well, first of all, January of 1923, she was living in San Francisco and had a baby named Jean. So if you go numbers-wise, maybe they were fighting when the place burned down because she had gotten pregnant. As either that numbers-wise, she must have gotten pregnant the very night after burning the place down. But she ended up married to a guy by the name of James Ryan, and with him embarked on a career of robbing banks. Well, not just banks. In San Francisco, they had a big robbery of the Pacific Gas and Electric Company. And when a couple of members of the gang were arrested a few months later, they said, well, Virginia never did any robbing, but she was the brains of the whole operation. She would drill all the guys relentlessly. She would take them to task for any tiny mistake, any detail they couldn't remember. She would take the money and dole it out as she saw fit. They were all just terrified of her. She was like the Lady McBee of the operation. She couldn't work for herself because she had a wooden leg and a baby at home. But she had still not been found a couple of years later. In late 1925, her husband, James Ryan, was shot to death in a robbery in New York. And she went to the morgue to view the body under an assumed name. But they knew they were looking for somebody with a wooden leg, and they were able to catch her pretty quickly. So this made the news. At the time, the police said they didn't think they could really hold her on anything because she hadn't necessarily done anything that was strictly illegal herself. But in Chicago, it was also mentioned that James Ryan had a history in Chicago. In 1921, Terrible Tommy O'Connor busted out of prison in Chicago. He was in jail they'd been looking for this guy for years. He had shot a cop, he had shot his best friend, he had been in holdups all over the place. He had shot a guy at the old Illinois Central Station where Millennium Park is now. And in 1921, he had been sentenced to hang. He was a couple of days from being executed when he and 3 other guys broke out of the prison, and Terrible Tommy was never seen again. For years, this was a trick known for every Chicago newspaper reporter. If you needed to sleep off a hangover or something, call the boss and say, I got a hot tip on where Terrible Tommy O'Connor is now. I'm just going to have to go follow this one up. Everybody did it at one time or another. And in fact, it was just a few years later they switched to the electric chair. But Terrible Tommy's sentence said he must hang by the neck until dead. So every now and then there would have to be a newspaper article pointing out that if we ever catch this guy, by God, we're still going to have to hang him. And in fact, they kept the old timbers that were used to build the gallows in the basement of the jail until the late 1970s, when a judge finally ruled that he must be dead by now anyway, and had them sold off to a Wild West museum. Ripley's Believe It or Not bought them a couple of years ago. And in their advertising, they said, these were the gallows used to hang the Haymarket anarchists. Like, they were not. They rebuilt the gallows every few years. These were used to hang maybe 3 or 4 people you've never heard of, and most of the wood had rotted away anyway. But one of the 3 guys who escaped with Terrible Tommy O'Connor was a guy named Edward Darrow. And it turned out his real name was James Ryan. So that was the person that Virginia Harrison married, was one of the guys who broke out with Terrible Tommy. At least according to the Daily News, I found out that very little was ever said about Edward Darrow, the guy who broke out with him. For all the pages and pages they spilled about Terrible Tommy, they might mention the other guy was Edward Darrow, a robber, once. But he had disappeared as well. But in 1925, they determined that he was that guy who had been shot under the name of James Ryan, and mentioned that he was also some kind of a bond swindler, which makes me wonder if he's the same James Ryan from Chicago in the 1910s who was running a clairvoyant scam. Down on State Street, there was a guy named James Ryan who had a clairvoyant parlor. People would come in to get their fortune read, and he ran it like a business. There were no crystal balls, no low lighting or anything. He just wore a suit, but acted as though he was able to see from beyond. Really, the fortune-telling was just a front. What he was really doing was identifying wealthy widows who needed to figure out what to do with all their money, at which point he would sell them a bunch of junk bonds. He was clearing a fortune. He got away with it for years because he was also paying off the cops. But eventually he got caught. The cops tried to assassinate the guy who had been making all of the payments to him, a guy named Barney Birch. So it was a pretty wild story for a while. He doesn't seem like the type who would necessarily have become a bank robber a couple of years later, but they apparently he and Virginia, whether he was the clairvoyant guy or just the guy who broke out with Terrible Tommy O'Connor, ran a whole number of robberies out around California around 1924, including, for those of you watching at home, including the Pullman Company. They robbed the Pullman Company. Over on Mysterious Chicago, Pullman is kind of a running joke. Every time I go to the Pullman neighborhood, I lose something or my car breaks down or something. So we blame the ghost of Pullman for a lot of things around here. Lillian died of natural causes in 1981. She is buried in Shalom Memorial Park under the name of Nelise Rosenfeld. So that's why I couldn't find her before. I never would have thought to look up Nelise Rosenfeld. But it was very nice to find that out, partly because it was nice to find the end of a story where nobody gets serial killed. Most of the stories I'm researching, everybody gets serial killed in the end. It was nice to find one where everybody lives more or less happily ever after. She became a successful mystery novelist. She had a play that was produced on Broadway. She lived all over the country, saw every Broadway show in the 50s and 60s, and her son still just thought the world of her. So, it's little bits of Bohemia still survive. Are there any questions at this point?
Ooh, questions. Don't be shy.
In the back.
Adam, can you repeat it?
Yeah, I'll repeat them.
Who owns Free Studios now?
who owns Tree Studios now. I'm not sure. There's retail on the first floor. I don't think it's run as an artist studio anymore. But it still says Tree Studios over the door.
It does.
What?
It does.
It does? Yeah. But still around, baby Rembrandt would be 117, so he's probably not still around now. I'll fly in with the Mandalorian. Yeah. Sorry, Stark.
Sure. Are there any other buildings that we could still walk by and see back in that era?
From around then, not too many that I know of. Like the wind blew in, you can see in these couple of pictures, it just looks like an old Wild West frame house or something. And it burned down in 1922. It doesn't look like it burned the whole building down, but she didn't operate out of there again. It's certainly gone now. Bughouse Square is still in operation. The Newberry Library across the street from it is still there. You can still walk down Tooker Place, though you definitely won't see the dill pickle there anymore. Just luxury condos and stuff. Then by the 1950s, all of that had there was a whole lot on Rush Street, like about where Rush and State comes together. It was like Maurice Beatnik Bookstore. And I was initially focused more on that era just because I could still find people to interview. Like the Bughouse Square debates at the time, you could go there, they have those once a year. And there'd be like old timers who remember going back there in the 50s, still talking about it and still making the exact same speeches they had made 50 years ago. The same conspiracy theories. A couple of new ones now and then, but the same basic ones. Like I remembered, one of the guys mentioned in the Daniel Pinkwater book was a guy named William Lloyd Smith. He was William Lloyd Floyd in the book, and in researching it, it turned out he had run for president on the Beatnik Party, in 1960. The Beatnik Party made him their nominee for president. And his goal was to convince people not to vote at all, because he was an anarchist. So the slogan was, vote for Bill Smith is no vote at all. So he ran a place called Maurice Beatnik Bookstore, and I went in, I was just asking people around, asking the old timers of the Bughouse Square debates, and one of them just happened to mention, oh yeah, and Bill Smith, who ran that place, and I'm like, oh yeah, he was the Beatnik Party candidate for president. The guy said, yes, I was the vice president candidate. There's a guy named Joffrey Stewart, who had been around since the 50s. He's alluded to in the poem Howl. He's the guy in Howl who was passing out incomprehensible leaflets in Fireplace, Chicago. He still passed out incomprehensible leaflets at the time. He told me the whole story. It's like Slim Brundage, who is a name that you learn right away reading about 50s Bohemia. It's like got us all bus tickets to go to New York for the Beatnik Party convention. He expected to get the nomination himself, but nobody could really stand him. Partly because he got them all tickets to New York, but not tickets back. So, initially when it came time to nominate anybody, Joffrey raised his hand and said, our candidate should be a bastard. Is there a bastard in the house? And a guy named Jimmy the Greek said, I'm a bastard. So he said, I nominate Jimmy the Greek. But eventually it fell to Bill Smith, and Joffrey became the vice president candidate. It became kind of a footnote in political history. But these guys were still around, finding people from the 1920s. I was able to talk to Len Dupree, the old alderman, who, he was the guy who told me radio killed Bughouse Square. And he was about 100 at the time. In the back.
So a cup of tea was 75 cents. How much was a police handout?
How much was a police handout? Good question. I know they didn't usually have the name. Well, actually, Barney Birch put out a whole schedule of how much he was paying the police for different things, like how much a pickpocket would be paying to stay out of trouble, how much a bootlegger would be paying to stay out of trouble. In the 1920s, I think the cost went up quite a lot, though. Initially, he said it wasn't too much in the early 1890s, but then when the World's Fair came around, the prices just skyrocketed for paying the cops off. In the 1920s, it was generally said that the bootleggers would come around to these Bohemian places, too. I mean, Dino Banion's flower shop, most of the Bohemians already knew Dino Banion, the head of the North Side Mob. He got his start as a singing waiter in McGovern Brothers at Clark in Ontario. And then it was said in one book, like anything to do with the gangsters, it's very difficult to know how seriously to take this. But he would make a lot of the deliveries to the Bohemian places himself, because a lot of his guys who normally did the running didn't want to go into these places because there's too many men-kissing men inside of them. To which Dean said, I'm just asking them to deliver the booze, not to date them. But he himself also ran a flower shop as a day job. That was just over on State in Chicago, so he would have been right in the Bohemian region anyway. Question from the internet.
Although there are 800 comments, none are questions.
You're all talking about drinking.
George Pullman asks, I would like to know who Adam's favorite train industry robber baron is.
Who is my favorite train industry robber baron? Columbus R. Cummings.
Okay, great answer. Also, how did Virginia get the wooden leg?
How did Virginia get the wooden leg? One article said that she lost her foot to cancer. Whether that's true or not, it's hard to say. It's I don't have enough data about that to back it up. I'm amazed that they even knew what the baby's name was. I was able to find a birth announcement for baby Jean. It was baby Jean Ryan, mother's name Harrison, January of 1923. But other than that, I couldn't find too much. It was often said that her father was a fairly prominent man in suburban Chicago. And her father did have a statement saying, "She has absolutely broken my heart. She has run half a dozen hold-up gangs by now." But they never actually gave his name. I imagine that Virginia Harrison probably wasn't her real name either, which makes this stuff kind of tricky. She probably stopped using the name Ryan after this too. So what became of baby Jean or what became of her after this, that's still an open question right now.
I had another question, but I'm struggling to find it. Okay. When you were putting this talk together, what was your favorite thing you learned?
When I was putting this talk together, my favorite thing was all this new stuff about Virginia Harrison having a connection to terrible Tommy O'Connor. Most of this stuff I already knew. So putting this talk together was, that was the main thing, was just putting the pictures together for this one. But my favorite thing to have found out was connecting, finding out that Lillian Collier went on to write mystery novels. That was a pretty big moment to find that one out for me.
Good answer.
It's always fun when you get to solve a mystery.
Any other questions? Don't be shy. Final call.
I know I've been fairly thorough here.
It's true.
Now her mystery novels and her more serious literary novels you can find them on eBay in like the $20 range. They're very much just in the style of what was popular literary fiction in the early 1940s. I wouldn't say it holds up really well, but they're pretty good.
All right.
Oh no, one more question in the back.
So these Bohemian speakeasies, were they integrated or were they like whites only?
They were generally integrated. This is at a time when most bars were they generally tended to be men only. But this was something that people made a lot of hay about. It's like it's men and women discussing sex openly. You know, half of those lectures at the Wind Blew Inn and at the Dill Pickle Club, sex was a very common topic. These were in mixed company, mixed race. Yeah, they were generally integrated. That's a pattern you see like in New York. I did a thing in like 1860s New York for a while, the Bohemian dives there. There's a place called Harry Hill's Variety Theater that a lot of people wrote about. That was about the only integrated place in the city, at least officially. All right. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you, guys. That concludes our presentation for the evening. Please feel free to stick around, have another drink. Again, if you would be so kind as to throw us some money, if you can afford it, chicagoforchicagoans.org/donate, or check out all the QR codes scattered around the room. We do this every Thursday night until, mid-April or so. So please check out our website, take a flyer home with you, and keep coming to our events. We really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much.
Hell yeah! I was afraid that wasn't going to go long enough, but wow. Okay.
Oh, cash tips go in a bucket at the front.
Oh, there is a.
Oh, one quick thing. I'll be posting some files next week.